Some video monitors for gaming and high-end smartphones use Quad HD. That would be 1440p, which is 2560 on the width, 1440 on the height. More common nowadays is 4K, and 4K would be expressed as 2160p or 3480 pixels on the width, 2160 on the height. That's what we call 4K or ultra high definition resolution. And the actual resolution of 4K is 4 times what 1080 is, okay? So it kind of goes up exponentially, if you like. This is just a little graphic that shows you a number of different parameters. And if you look at standard definition, 480, so 480 is very much your standard one. Now, I don't know if I skipped, sorry, I skipped over something very important here. I think I did. And that is the format. There's 2 formats here which are commonly used. One format is used most often in North America, and that is the NTSC. The other format which is used is PAL, and that's used in Europe, most specifically in the UK or in Britain, in Great Britain. And they very much are on the PAL system. In North America, we tend to be on the NTSC. Actually, not tend to, we're always on NTSC in terms of the format, okay? So on your camera, some of you will have the option to set it for PAL or for NTSC. Only use PAL if you know that your video is going to be sent to Great Britain or some of the European countries. If it's going to be used anywhere else in the world, use NTSC. It's a more universal format, okay? So back to that little graphic here. This just shows you the name for the resolution, what the actual measurement is, and again, it's the height which is used for the name. So 480p is 704 by 480, and that's the NTSC. For PAL, you'll see that it's a different name, 576, and a different measurement that's used. But we're not going to be dealing with PAL at all. The aspect ratio is the same as it is in still photography. That is, it's the ratio of the height to, it's actually the ratio of the width to the height, just expressed as the lowest denominator ratio, okay? Then when we go to high def, 720, 1080, and then ultra high def, 4K, 8K, and then this one doesn't really have a name, but that is not used very often at all. For digital cinema, if it's going to be shown in a theater, 2K and 4K have a different measurement than it would be if it was just for display on a computer screen or some kind of a digital display. But if it's going to be projected on a theater screen, 2K and 4K have a different measurement for it. And that's because the aspect ratio is different for screens in theaters than it is for your computer screen. I'll show you the difference in just a few moments of what that looks like. Just another little graphic here to show you the difference between 8K, 4K, HD, 1080 HD, and SD or 720. And you can see that there's quite a difference. I do quite a bit of work for a realty company called Remax. I don't know if the country that you're in right now has Remax, but it's a very much a predominant realty company here in Canada. And I often go out and do still photography for their events. And videographer who comes with me, I know him quite well. We have worked together a great deal. And at the last shoot we did for Remax not too long ago, he had just bought a brand new camera and he was very, very happy with it because it would shoot 8K. His name's Ryan, and I said, Ryan, I said, how come? I said, what? You can't really see a difference between 8K and 4K or even 1080 on a computer screen. You won't notice the difference. And the file size is so much bigger. I said, why do you need to shoot at 8K for the type of stuff where we're just doing event photography? We're not making feature films. And he said, because I can crop. So if you take an 8K video image, as you see in front of you here, you can crop it down to the size of a 4K, and you still have a very high resolution. You still have 4K resolution. You could take an 8K video and crop it down in post-processing in Premiere Pro to an HD, and look at how much you can zoom in, and you will still have 1080 resolution. So that's a big reason why videographers will shoot at a much higher resolution than they will actually end up with, okay? The only downside to that is 8K files take a lot more memory than 4K or 1080, okay? So you end up having to have really big memory cards, and you'll end up using a lot of hard drive space to store those files, okay? But in terms of usability when you're editing, 8K or 4K are much more usable than 1080 or SD. Okay? So that's something to keep in mind as you move along. So as I mentioned, aspect ratio is simply the ratio of the width to the height. The normal for DSLRs and mirrorless cameras is 4:3. Widescreen is 16:9. So if you've got a widescreen TV, and it's at full resolution when you view it, that is, you can view the image right out to the corners of the TV screen, then you're viewing most likely at 16:9. For the aspect ratio, the ratio of the width to the height. Feature films are sometimes shot in a wider aspect. That is because the widescreen in cinemas is wider than it is for your widescreen TV that you would have at home, even if it's a large format one. And quite often that is 2.35:1. But that would only be if the film was going to be viewed in a cinema where it's being projected onto a screen. Here's the difference in how it looks. This is a 16:9 aspect ratio, or the 1080 that we often use. This is the 2.35:1, which is often used in a cinema. And you can see it's much wider. It is narrower height-wise, okay, or it has less height to it, but it's wider, so you can look across it more, like you do in the theater, if you watch a film in the theater. Frame rate. Now, we talked about how motion pictures using film were individual photos put together one after another in the order that they were shot and in the same time. Or if you wanted it to be fast motion, you would show them faster, or slow motion, you would show them slower. But the rate that they're shot was the frame rate, the number of frames per second that the film was shot at. We use a similar, well, it's actually the same unit of measurement, except on your camera, it's done digitally. It doesn't literally shoot the individual frames per se with the shutter opening and closing that fast. Shutter speed is different, but the frame rate, when you shoot video, it will in fact expose using the computer software that's built into your camera. It will literally shoot a certain number of frames from the sensor. And that is the frame rate, and it's expressed in the number of frames per second. That's how fast the camera will be shooting individual images to make your motion picture or your video, okay? This also is determinant in the playback as well. So the standard frame rate, and when we say standard frame rate, that is to make regular types of footage, people moving, people doing things, cars driving down the road, an airplane flying overhead, a dog running, whatever. in order to have the most realistic look to it, 24 frames per second is the magic number. That's the number you need to know and you need to remember. The standard frame rate is 24. Now, some digital cameras, Sony's in particular, will have it at 23.96 something or other. I forget what the decimal place is. That, for all intents and purposes, is 24 frames per second, okay? Now, if you wanted to do, sometimes you'll see in sports or sometimes you'll see in feature films, you'll see kind of what I call ultra slow motion or really dramatic slow motion. And in order to have a high quality video for that, sometimes it's necessary to shoot the video at a higher frames per second rate. So you'll find that your camera, many of your cameras will now shoot at 60 frames per, 32 or 60. Some will even do 120 frames per second. And again, that literally is how many frames are being shot by your camera per second when you are shooting your video. So if you take 60 frames per second and show it at half the speed, then you're coming out to 30 frames per second, which is pretty close to 24, okay? So that's how you get those really smooth slow motion effects. You do have to shoot at a higher frame rate, but then you slow it down. There is no value if you're not going to be doing slow motion in a video to shooting it at 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second. There's no increase in the quality if you're going to be playing it back at the regular speed. But if you are going to be doing super slow motion, and some of the new video specific cameras that are intended for shooting sports, for example, auto racing, high-end auto racing, Formula One, or motorcycle racing, motorcycle Grand Prix racing, skiing, cycling, MX and things like that, even boarding. Some of the cameras now will shoot up in the neighborhood of 600 frames per second to get those really dramatic, ultra slow motion effects that run really, really smooth. If you try to slow down 24 frames per second, and let's say you want it to run at 1/10 the speed, that's going to be 2.4 frames per second that are going to be displayed. And that will actually produce a very jerky looking video, okay? It won't be smooth. But if you take a 600 frame per second shot and slow it down to 24 frames per second, which is kind of the normal speed, then you're going to reduce the speed so that F1 car that went by at over 300 kilometers an hour is going to look like it's going by at a slow walking speed, but it will be nice and smooth. Okay, it'll be really, really smooth because you'll still be at 24 frames per second, which is your optimum for smooth footage, okay? I hope, I know that's kind of complicated, but it's important to understand that. Please, if you have any questions at any point in time, please just turn on your microphone and ask, okay? It's important that you understand this stuff. So the next point is frame rates can be either progressive or interlaced. In general, most of your cameras will only shoot at the progressive frame rate. And these are different ways that the frame rates are processed in the computer inside your camera, the little CPU in your camera. Interlaced is, I'm not going to get into what interlace is used for. It's used on some specific types of video, but just avoid it. Just don't even use interlaced because it can give you problems in processing and playing back. Okay, and you certainly don't want to save your videos when you're processing them in the interlaced frame rate format. Okay, so progressive is the way to go. So the settings for your camera when you're shooting video should be the progressive frame rate type, if that's an option. I should have put on here as well NTSC, which is your mode, and 1080p, which is 1920 by 1080 at 24 frames per second on the high bit rate. I'm going to talk about bit rate either in the next frame or a frame coming up. But those are your settings for your camera. progressive, NTSC, 1080, 24 frames per second, high bit rate. That's for optimal video shooting. Now, your other camera settings, your aperture, your ISO, and your speed, which we used for still photography, function for the aperture and the ISO in a very similar way they did for still photography. That is, aperture is used for controlling your exposure, and it's also used for controlling the depth of field or the depth of focus. ISO, which of course is the sensitivity of the sensor in your camera, is for exposure, but at high ISOs, like with still photography, you can get a lot of digital noise, which doesn't look very good. Okay? Film grain is a different look, and we're much better to shoot clean video footage without digital noise, and then add film grain to the effect when we're processing it later. Shutter speed also is responsible for exposure, but it's very important that we actually don't use it for exposure because it very much affects how smooth or how jerky your video appears. Okay? So if we're shooting at 24 frames per second, it's very important that we shoot at the correct shutter speed for 24 frames per second. If we shoot at 24 frames per second and we shoot at a shutter speed that is a slow shutter speed, like 1/8 of a second or 1/15 or 1 second or 2 seconds or something like that, you will get a lot of blurring in your video, and it will make it look almost kind of like it's kind of dreamy. It's like the motion, if it's people moving or cars moving, they'll like have trails behind them, and it's kind of like a dream sequence. The problem with doing it when you're shooting like that is you cannot undo that in the processing later in Premiere Pro or in other software. You can't undo it. Once it's shot like that, that's the way it is. You can't undo it. So generally we avoid doing that. If we want to get that kind of dreamy kind of look, we can introduce that through video effects in processing later, and then we can control it much better. If you shoot with too fast of a shutter speed, like 1/250th of a second or 1/1000th or 1/4000th, the video footage will look jerky, almost as if you were looking at somebody moving. You know what a strobe light is? It's a light that flashes on and off quite rapidly. And so any kind of motion, people moving in a strobe light, it looks like they go, it looks kind of jerky almost. And that's what will happen if you use too fast of a shutter speed. So, outlined in brilliant orange here, the best shutter speed for a normal appearance is approximately double the frame rate. So if you're shooting regular video footage at 24 frames per second, you double that to get 48. Well, you can't actually do 48 on your camera because I don't think any of your cameras will do 1/48th of a second. But 1/50th is close enough. 1/50th, you could even do 1/60th, and that would be close enough as well. You want to be approximately double the frame rate. If you were shooting at a frame rate of, let's say you wanted to do some slow motion and you wanted it to be nice and smooth, so you bump your frame rate up to 60 frames per second, then you would need to shoot at a shutter speed of 1/120 or as close to that as you could get. If you were shooting with one of those ultra high frame rate cameras that you certainly or almost certainly don't have access to for really high-end sports photography or movies or motion pictures, anything like that, shooting at say 600 frames per second, then in order to have it look normal, slow it down so that it's slow motion but still looks normal, you'd have to shoot at 1/1200th, or 1/1200th of a second, in which you can do with cameras, but I don't think any of your cameras will have the capacity to shoot at 600 frames per second. Most of the higher end cameras that are in the price range that we're dealing with here, the fastest they would go would be 120 frames. Many of your smartphones will shoot at 120 frames per second if you want to do smooth, slow motion. But again, the trade-off there is it will be a very, very large file size. okay? And there's nothing to be gained by doing that unless you're doing slow motion for the playback, okay? I hope that makes sense. I know it's very technical and it sounds like a bit of mumbo jumbo, but it's important that you understand that. So just to summarize that, aperture and ISO basically function the same as in still photography. Shutter speed is used to get the best look from whatever frame rate you're shooting at, okay? And you have to offset for the change in exposure with your aperture and your ISO. Data rate, okay? Data rate and bit rate are very, very similar. They're just a different expression of basically the same thing. Data rate refers to the speed that data is transferred. Data is transferred a number of different places in the chain of recording video. It's the first place that you use a data rate or a bit rate is the transferring from your sensor into your CPU or the little computer chip that is in your camera, and then in turn onto your memory card. So you've got a little bit of a chain there. The sensor records or picks up the light, sends it to the CPU or the computer in the camera, and then that goes on to your memory card. And there's another data rate or bit rate that is the transfer of the video footage or your images, still images, from your memory card on your camera to your computer. Then there's another data rate that goes from your memory in your computer to the internet, and then if you're viewing it on the internet, or if you're transferring it onto a hard drive or whatever. And then there's the final data rate, which is the way it downloads from the internet or a hard drive onto the viewer's computer and the speed that it's processed there. So there's a lot of data rates here, but in general, we're only dealing with a few of them. And that is actually two of them are the only ones that we're dealing with. And the others will be set automatically by the devices. And that is the bit rate or the data rate for shooting on your camera and the bit rate or the data rate for downloading from wherever it is on the internet, YouTube, Vimeo, social media, whatever. Those are the only two that we're going to be concerned with. Data rate is expressed, and here's the difference between data rate and bit rate. They're just the speed that information or little pieces of information, if you like, are transferred. Data rate is expressed in bits per second of footage, and bit rate is measured in bits per frame as opposed to just per second, okay? But for all intents and purposes, they express the same thing, and that is the transfer of data on whatever it is, camera or computer, or from the internet, or uploading to the internet as well. The units of expression for both are KPS or KBPS, which is kilobytes per second, megabytes per second, or MBPS or MPS as it's sometimes expressed, and gigabytes per second, which is either GPS or GBPS, okay, which is gigabytes per second. And it just depends on how much data is being transferred. Okay. Typical for YouTube for viewing is 5 to 8 megabytes per second. For higher quality platforms, 8 to 12. Okay. Now, the great thing about Premiere Pro and some of the other software packages that you can work with, but we're going to be working with Premiere Pro because it's the industry standard for this, is they have presets. So when we go to save our video after we've worked on it in Premiere Pro, you can choose, and I'm going to show you how to do that, you can choose a preset for YouTube that will automatically set the data rate, okay? On your camera, you want to set the bit rate, or sometimes it's just indicated as the quality of the video footage under movie settings or video settings, and it will either be high or normal quality. You want to set it on high one, Okay? And again, for your cameras, you will not have a wide range of settings that you can use for that. So it will be either high or normal. Select high because you want to record your video at the highest quality you possibly can. And then after you've processed it, if you want to do it for a website and it's going to be just used for viewing on smartphones or tablets, then you can reduce the download speed, the data rate, which is basically the speed. You can reduce it there, but always best. It's like shooting raw for still photos. You want to have the best quality when you shoot, and then you can downsize after that if you want, but you can't upsize. If you shoot at a lower quality bit rate or a lower quality video footage, you can't upsize at a later point in time. There'll be a compromise in the quality. You can downsize, but you can't upsize. Okay. We're almost finished the technical mumbo jumbo here. I hope you're still with me. So the next term that we have to deal with in video is called the codec or video codec. And video codec is very similar to the file types that we use in still photography. Remember we talked about RAW and JPEG and TIFF and PSD all being different types of file formats. Well, video codecs are very similar to that in video. The thing about video is that uncompressed video files tend to be very, very large. So most of your cameras in the range that you people are almost certainly looking at this point in time, that's basically your $500 to maybe $2,000 range in Canadian dollars, your mid-range cameras will not shoot raw video because the file sizes are so large that they're not considered to be workable. It's really only when you get into professional video cameras that you will have compressed video files. So video codec or video codecs are software. It's built into, they're usually not, very seldom are they standalone software. It's built into your processing, Premiere Pro or Aperture or whatever video software you're using, Premiere Pro for us. That what it does is it compresses it when you shoot, and then it decompresses it when you view it. So the term codec comes from compress and decompress. And that makes it easier for your camera and your computer to process your video files without them being, and also reduces the size that it takes up on your hard drive. Because if you shot raw, uncompressed video file, you would find that you are going through a tremendous amount of hard drive space very, very quickly. They are very big files in the gigabytes. So codecs are used all the time with these mid-range cameras or certainly lower range cameras, or if you're, heaven forbid, if you're using your cell phone, you'll be using some kind of a video codec. They are lossy, so you want to be careful. There's a whole bunch of different ones, but the one that has emerged in the past maybe 5 to 10 years as the standard that most people use nowadays, and most cameras and phones and video cameras will default to, is the one that is called H.264, H.264. We usually just say H.264. And that is what if you've got one of these mid-range cameras, that's what your camera will default to, your phone will default to it, okay? It's very, very standard. And it's a really good compromise of saving memory space and giving you video files that are of a size that your computer can work with without you having to have a really big high-end computer to make these files work. This is the gold standard, okay? But again, video codec is very similar to the file format that we use in still photography. If you shoot from multiple sources, let's say you've got several different cameras that you use on a shoot, and they don't all happen to be set to the H.264 codec, Premiere Pro, this is one of many good things about Premiere Pro, it will recognize multiple codecs and read them, even if they're in the same project. So here's just a little graphic that shows you a few things here. We're not going to go into this in detail, but it's got the NTSC, talks about the frame size, the standard frame rate. Here's the ones that we usually use for NTSC at 1080. There's your frame size, is very much the standard. We usually shoot at 24 or 23.98, which is very close. Don't use interlaced for the scanning method. This is just a little graphic that talks a little bit more about the video codec. I've already explained most of this. The video container is another measurement for video. Video technically is much more complicated than still photography is, because you've got all these different factors and parameters that enter into it. But when it comes to the video container, it's basically, it's almost like the shell that holds the video, okay? And there are three formats which are commonly used, but only one of them that you really need to be aware of. And that is the first one, which is MP4 or MPEG-4, and it will show up as the extension or the suffix on your file names as .mp4. This is very, very common, and it's used with H.264 very commonly. It works on all platforms, computers, digital displays, phones, tablets. Most cameras and smartphones will shoot using the H.264 and the MPEG-4. Some of them will shoot in a native format as well, but it can easily be converted, i.e. the Apple .move format, very similar to MP4. Two other ones which, to be honest with you, I haven't encountered the WebM one. This was a format that Google tried to introduce a number of years ago as an open source, meaning that anybody can go into the actual software and change it. Okay, it's not like Apple software that nobody can get into the actual code of the software. But with open source, anybody can go into the code if they know what they're doing and manipulate it. Didn't catch on, so chances of you encountering it are not that great. However, the OGG one, OGG or OGV, this one actually caught on a little bit more. And for example, when I did the slideshow, that footage that I showed you of the first movie done by the French French cinematographer, that when I downloaded that from the internet was an OGG format, and it wouldn't play in Keynote. So I had to import it into Premiere Pro and convert it to an MP4 before it would play in the Keynote. So you should be aware of that one. That one I have actually encountered. So you may encounter it in certain places. Okay, so shooting with your DSLR. I'm going to have to go and turn the lights on so that you can see my camera. Just give me a moment. I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back. So when we're shooting with our DSLR, I'm just going to get out. I've got a D5600 here that I'm going to use for the demo. There's a number of settings that if you're not shooting with a Nikon DSLR or mirrorless camera, the settings for your camera may be, if you're shooting with Sony or if you're shooting with Canon or Lumix or any of the other manufacturers, the settings might have different names they might be on different menus. So you may have to use your owner's manual to look these up and find where they are, because they may not be in the same place and they may not be called the same thing. But we're going to give our best shot to try and get your camera set up so that you can do higher level video shooting. So first of all, make sure that you can, in fact, shoot in the manual setting by going into the menu of your camera. So go into the menu button. And if you're shooting with a Nikon camera, there will be a menu called the shooting menu. If I hold this up there, hopefully you can see it. It's called the shooting menu. Might be called something else if you've got a different make. You might just be looking for the video menu. Okay. And then you want to go into the shooting menu and go to the options that say movie settings. Okay. And once you're into the movie settings, you should be able to see frame size and frame rate, movie quality, microphone, wind noise reduction, manual movie settings, and possibly some other ones if you're shooting with a different type of camera. Now, the first thing you want to enable is manual movie settings. So if you've got that option on your camera, it will be at the bottom of the display. Go down to that. And I don't know if you can see this. I hope you can. Go down to where it says manual movie settings and turn that to on. Make sure it's on. Okay. Then go up to the top menu item, which is the frame size and frame rate. Go into those options and make sure that it's set for 1080p 24 frames per second. Okay. And that will be expressed as on the Nikon cameras as 24p. Now, you do in fact have the option on the Nikon cameras of shooting at 50 or 60. Some of you might have an option to shoot at 120 frames per second. But again, the only time you want to use that is if you know in your process video you're going to be using slow motion and you want it to be nice and smooth. If you're going to be just doing regular shooting, shoot at 24 frames per second or 24p. Anything higher than that is a waste of memory. It doesn't give you any better results. So 1080, which of course is expressed 1920 by 1080. That's your resolution that we talked about. The number of pixels on the width, by the number of pixels on the height, and the frame rate. Okay. Now, if you're shooting with a Sony camera, I know from this morning's class, I had a couple of students with Sony cameras, and they had to use a different way of expressing that. And I believe that they can only shoot at 23.98 frames per second, which is fine. That is close enough to 24 that it's going to be just fine. So set that, 1080p, 24 frames per second. Then there's another setting, which is movie quality. That is your bit rate, and you want to set that on the highest one it will go to. Okay. So if it's a Nikon camera, it will be expressed as movie quality. If you're shooting with another camera, it might say bit rate or it might say data rate, and you want to put that on its highest one that it will go to on your camera. Because again, always start with the highest quality. Now, again, if you're shooting with an upper level camera, you can, if you can choose progressive or interlace scan modes, then choose progressive. But most of you, if not all of you, will not have that option. That's only on the really high level cameras that you have that option. One other thing, the microphone. If you have an option there to set your microphone settings, my suggestion would be for now, set it to auto sensitivity, but at a later point in time, we will change that. Because what will happen with auto sensitivity is your camera, when you're recording your audio, will try and make everything sound the same volume, which isn't very creative. Because if you're doing some footage and there's somebody yelling or screaming or something, and then it goes on the next clip to somebody whispering, or maybe just some background sounds or something like that. If you put it on the auto setting for the microphone, for the auto recording, it will try and neutralize that so that they all sound the same. And that takes a lot of the effect of the having louder parts and softer parts out. But for our purposes right now, just for our demo shooting, you can put it on auto and that will be fine. But later on, you'll want to go into where you can actually change that, change the recording level of the audio, okay? So the next thing to do, oh, hello, yeah, somebody there?
Can you explain slowly? I cannot catch it.
Oh, I'm going a little too fast?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try.
I do a different camera, so I had to find it.
Okay, very good. Thank you for telling me that. So where did I lose you? At what point did I lose you?
Almost everything, I'm sorry.
Oh dear. On this slide or on the previous slide?
No, about the camera setting.
Oh, okay, okay. What kind of a camera are you shooting with?
Sony ZV.
That's fine. I don't need the model number. I just need to know the manufacturer. Okay, so on your menu on the back of your camera, you should have a number. If you hit the menu button in the upper, I think it's in the upper left, the button that says menu, then you'll see at the top of the display, looks like a little video camera, the first, I think, 3 or 4 of them. Is that what you see?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, those, underneath those is where you'll find all of the things that we're talking about here, okay? Now, remember, I will upload this presentation so you can go through these on the slides and make these settings if you can't find them right now, okay?
Yeah.
Because you may not be able to find them, but you can go through and you see where it says set frame size and frame rate to those 2 figures, 1920 by 1080. You can, on your own, at your own speed, find those. You might have to look some of them up in your owner's manual, possibly, but you can find those. And then set your frame rate to 24 frames per second. Again, you'll have to find it because your menus are different than what the Nikon ones are. But they're there. They're there somewhere. But you can do it on your own, find it. And then your movie quality, which is, actually, I'm going to change this on the slide. Give me 1 second so that you know what this is. Movie quality, which is bit or data rate. So if it's on the Nikon camera, but yours isn't obviously, it will say movie quality, but on your camera, it might say video quality, or it might say bit rate, or it might say data rate. You want it on the highest one possible. I'm going to change that too. Oops. That's the one we don't want to scrimp on. So hopefully that will help you. So it's really only those few things that you have to do is your frame size and your frame rate, your frames per second, your frame rate. Frame size, which is your 1080, your frame rate, which is 24, or it might be 23.98, I think it is, or something like that. And then the movie quality or the data or bit rate. You just have to set those things. I don't think now your Sony camera, if I'm not mistaken, will also give you the option to shoot in NTSC or PAL. Make sure that you've chosen NTSC because you want your footage to be compatible with what you'll be using when you come to the college, okay? All of you at some point in time, I'm sincerely hoping, will make it on campus. Once you're here, then NTSC is the one you use. Whatever country you're in right now, it may be NTSC or it may be PAL, it just depends on where you are. But when you come to the college, it will be NTSC, so make sure you're using that one. Otherwise, any of the footage that you shoot now, you probably won't be able to use later. Okay. Next thing is make sure that your lens is set to manual focus. Now, if you have a switch on your lens, like this lens does, I can just flip it over to manual, to M, okay? Or sometimes you might have to go into the settings on the back of your camera and change your focus mode. So you can see I'm on focus mode there, and then I would just have to change it to manual. Okay, it's very important that you use manual focus when you are shooting video. And the reason for that is because the way that your camera will focus is there's a small little electric motor in the lens that adjusts the focus. And when you're shooting, the sound of that little electric motor, when it's working, will be quite noticeable on your audio. So it will basically render your audio unusable. And it will also adjust the focus depending on what you're pointing your camera at. Creative use of focus is very, very important in video. I mean, I don't know if you can kind of imagine this, but I can't begin to count the number of movies that I've watched where they use focus, especially in suspense or mystery movies. So there's been a crime committed. Let's say there's been a murder and there's a bloody knife on the table. They will use creative focus to focus on the knife, and then they'll move the point of focus to the victim or the criminal or the car or whatever. And the only way that you can do that is with manual focus, okay? Or the scene often will happen in such a way that it will start out of focus and then it will come into focus on whatever it is that the director and the camera person, the cinematographer or the videographer, wants the viewer to focus on. They literally will use the focus to make it what you focus on. And you cannot do that in autofocus. The problem with autofocus, other than you can't do those things, is when you're shooting video, of course, you're moving. The whole idea of shooting video is that you are shooting things moving. That's the idea. You don't want to do a video of something just standing completely still. Kind of defeats the purpose. You might as well just have a still photograph. So video is all about motion. And when you're moving, autofocus will focus on whatever the camera feels is the appropriate thing to focus on. Sometimes it will be the thing you want to focus on, but sometimes it won't be. The only way you can control your focus is by using manual focus. No videographer of any kind of level of competency or professionalism would use autofocus. Manual focus is the way that video is shot. Okay? Then, depending on what kind of camera you've got, in order to actually do your video, you'd have your camera set on the manual setting, of course. And then on the Nikon, the D5600, you just go on to live view. So now I'm on live view, and you can see me. Okay. Now I've got live view up, and that's how I will frame and do my focusing and whatnot, is through the live view. And I'm just getting this in focus. There we go. Sorry, I'm just making a quick adjustment here. There we go. Ta-da. And then to record video, now again, on the Nikon cameras, there's a little red button on the top, right by the shutter button. That is your start record and stop record button. On different cameras, it will be a different button that you will use. Some will use the shutter. Some will have a designated button for starting and stopping your recording of video. Okay. but you'll have to sort that out for whatever camera you're using because they're all different. Oh, one other thing, actually two other things that I want to mention here. One is the auto ISO and the auto white balance. On some cameras, and I think it was, oh shoot, I'm trying to remember what make it was this morning. If the mode wheel was set to fully manual or M, it would automatically go to auto ISO. Auto ISO is problematic because what will happen is it will adjust the ISO depending on what you are shooting. Now, let's say if I was shooting in this room, there are parts of this room that are darker than others. And of course, what the auto ISO will do is it will change the ISO for the darker and lighter parts of the room so that the room looks like it's all at one level of brightness. But we don't always want that. As a matter of fact, most of the time we don't want that. Most of the time we want parts of the room that are dark to be dark and parts of the whatever we're shooting that are light to be light. So it's quite imperative that you turn off the auto ISO setting, okay? And if you have a Nikon camera and you're doing that, to change that or to get it to not be auto ISO, there's a couple of ways you can do it. Sorry, one way you can do it if you're shooting with the D5600, and that is to go into the menu settings, and under the shooting menu again, there'll be one option that will say ISO sensitivity settings. And if you go into ISO sensitivity settings in the shooting menu, there is one option that says auto ISO sensitivity control. I don't know if you can see this or not. Make sure that is turned off because you should control the ISO yourself. So when you come into a situation that you're going to do your video in, you look on the back of your camera and you adjust your ISO and your aperture so that you get good exposure. So if I have my ISO not well set, let's say I've got it down at 100 here, then, oops, then my video is going to be quite dark, okay? And further, if I change my aperture, and to change the aperture, I actually have to come out of live view. But if I change my aperture to a really, really closed aperture, and when I go to my live view, it's going to be completely dark, okay? That's no good. So I have to change my aperture and my ISO to make for good exposure. And sometimes this takes a little bit of experimentation. But in this case, if I set for the lighting that I'm under here, if I set my aperture at f8 and my ISO at 3200 or 3200, then I get reasonably good exposure. You can see that the exposure is reasonably good. There I am. Hi, guys. Okay. And of course, remember your shutter speed should be set to double your frame rate. So in this case, I've got I've also got the light gone off here. Hopefully you can see that I've got my shutter speed at 1/50th of a second, my aperture at f8, and my ISO at 3200. Just going to turn the light back on here. 1 second. So again, I'm just gonna change this slide just a little bit. So I'm just gonna put a quick recap at the bottom here. Recap. settings. Just give me one moment here. Settings recap, or recapitulation, as that is short for. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm sorry. I'm not going to do that. And the reason why is because that will be set. I can't really do that. Okay, never mind. Forget that for a moment. I was going to put down some base settings, but the problem is that depending on where you're shooting, your light could be completely different. So that won't even work there. Okay. Oh yeah, there is one other thing that I do want to. I mentioned the auto ISO, and the other is the auto white balance. Okay. Now, when we're shooting still photography, we usually leave. One second here. So normally when we're shooting still photography, we usually put the white balance at auto. So if I go into my settings here, you can see that the white balance, I hope you can see, that the white balance is set for auto white balance. But the problem with that is that if you're in any kind of an environment where the color of the light is changing, let's say you're shooting in a room, and then when you pan your camera past a window where sunlight is coming in, the camera, if it's on auto white balance, will try to change the white balance for that bit of sunlight that comes through the window. And it will make the colors in your video footage all over the map. They'll be changing all over the place, and it looks really weird. It looks very amateurish, okay? So you're better off with your white balance to set it to whatever it happens to be where you are, what the light is. So in this case, I'm in a room that is almost all, actually it's not almost all, it's all fluorescent lights. So in my white balance, I'm going to change it from auto to fluorescent light. And then when I do my video footage, it won't be trying to adjust the colors according to the color of the light coming off of it, okay? So don't use auto white balance. Use the manual white balance setting. So you set it to, if you go outside and shoot, put it for sunlight or daylight if you're outside on a sunny day. If it's a cloudy day, set it for cloudy. If you're shooting in the shade on a sunny day, you're shooting in the shade of a tree or something, or a building or something like that, set it to shade. Okay, there's all those different settings. On the Nikon cameras, you've got auto, incandescent or tungsten, which is those old-fashioned types of lights, fluorescent, direct sunlight, flash, which you won't be using flash for video, cloudy, shade, or preset manual one, which we won't get into that for now. Just use the presets for that. Okay. But that will give you the white balance that you need. Okay, so that's a lot. I know we've covered a lot here. You can adjust the aperture for greater or less depth of focus or field. You can make corresponding adjustments for the ISO. Remember, it's still the same thing. The exposure triangle is still the same thing, but remember your shutter speed you don't use for controlling exposure, because it's used in determining the what your video looks like. It has an effect on your video. Either if you're using a shutter speed that is really slow, it will make your video look like it's all kind of blurry and kind of blurred out. If you use a shutter speed that is too fast, it will make your video look kind of choppy or kind of jerky. Okay. So there's your camera settings. Now what I'm going to suggest now is let's take a short break where I'd like you to do a few shots of short video just to make sure that your camera is set up for shooting video. Okay, I'm going to give you 10 minutes for this. I need to take a break and use the facility too. I ran down here directly from my previous class, so I need to go and make a little bathroom stop. So 10-minute break for now, and I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Okay, I'm back. I hope you're back. Can somebody type into the chat that you can see and hear me? Hello? Anybody there? Can you hear me? Can you see me? Nope. We're only taking a 10-minute break, not a hour-long break. Anybody there? Ah, very good. Thank you. So Anne, thank you, Karen. So you had a couple of questions there, or actually one question. You said, I don't have, I'm sorry, I couldn't record that. I didn't see that in time. And typically I don't record these sessions anyway. These are not asynchronous. These are synchronous. So everybody's supposed to be here. So you said, I don't have manual white balance, I just have auto white balance. Yes, you can use auto white balance for sure, but be aware that it can change the colors. What kind of a camera are you using on? What make is it? A Sony. Okay, your Sony should have manual white balance settings on it. So my suggestion is that you go into your owner's manual. If you have your owner's manual as a hard copy, if it came as a little booklet, that's great. If not, go into the online. There'll definitely be an online version of it, and just look up white balance settings for video. Okay, and you should be able to find. Actually, I could probably find it right now. Sony ZVE. Let me just see here. Sony ZVE, and then I'm just going to do owners manual. And SVE. Yeah, there's a, so on the website, I would have to download it, but, well, I guess I can do that. Oh, actually, here we go. So I'm going to, let me just share my screen with you here so you can see what I'm doing on. Give me a second, just going to share my screen. Okay, should be able to see my screen now. So here's where I just typed in Sony SVE. This comes up with the SVE 10, which is probably very similar to what you're using, or maybe it's different in a different country. Then I just clicked on where it says help guide or web manual. It took me to here. So now I'm going to put in white balance and see what we come up with. Recording, we'll get a whole bunch of different things that it will come up. Let's take a look as we're doing video. Let's see what it says under recording movies. Oh, we got all kinds of stuff here. So Anne, do you have anything like this? Have you seen anything like this? This has got all kinds of information for you. Lots and lots of stuff here. White balance right there. So here's where it is on right here, white balance. You go into menu, camera settings, white balance, and then you put it to the desired settings. Here's where you get all of your different options. Auto white balance, daylight, shade, cloudy, incandescent, warm fluorescent, cool fluorescent. You got a ton of different options here. And as I said, the best option is whatever the light you're shooting in, set it to that. So if you're shooting outside on a sunny day, put it on daylight. If you're shooting in the shade, etc. Put it for whatever light it is. Okay? And does that help? Yeah?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
A lot.
And did you actually find that page that I was looking at yourself?
Yes.
Because that would be a good page to bookmark on your browser. Okay.
Yes.
Where your where your manual is. Okay. You got all those different things. You can just do, or even just for this, you can just do a screen grab of it because it should be in front of you right now. If you're using a Mac, just do Shift Command and the number 3, and it will do a screen grab, screenshot. Okay. Okay, so hopefully that helps get you back on track. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the Premiere Pro tutorial. Now, I've got step-by-step instructions here for the entire tutorial. Premiere Pro is the software that we will be using for all of your video processing. Okay? There are other software packages available, including some very good ones. Final Cut Pro, a lot of people use. Aperture is used by some. The one software package that you should not use because it is very, very limited is iMovie or any of the native image processing software that comes with either with an Apple computer, with a MacBook or iMac or any of those, or on Windows. I think it's just called, it's either called Pictures or Photos, something like that. The adjustments that you can make are very, very limited. You don't have good control. You can't customize the export of the video when it's finished. Do not use those software packages. And as I said, if you go to Humber on the Hub, you should be able to download. I'm just going to see if I can see this for you. Just going to open a tab here. Do Humber on the Hub. On the Hub. So here it is, Humber on the Hub. Welcome, academic software on the Hub. If you go to that, you'll have to sign in, but then you will get, now I can't do this because it's only for students, okay? We can't buy the Adobe software. We used to be able to, the teachers did, and then for some reason they decided to be mean to us, and we can no longer, but you can. So here's where you can get your software very, very cheap, okay? I'm just looking here to see. Yeah, you see, we don't have, because I'm an instructor, we don't have the Adobe option. We've got some other options, but Adobe is the one that we need. Okay, so that's how you can download software for cheap. So, as I said, I've done up step-by-step instructions for you on how to do how to get into Premiere Pro. You need to download it, and of course, you need to download your video files. Now, for this tutorial, I would like you to go to this course in whatever browser you're using. Chrome, I find Chrome works the best for this kind of stuff. Go to Blackboard. You should be on Blackboard already because we're doing Blackboard Collaborate. Go to this course. I'm doing it with you right now. Scroll down until you come to Week 8 Content. Click on Week 8 Content. Then you'll see that there's a link to files for Premiere Pro PP tutorial. Click on that link. It will take you to the OneDrive link. Now watch, don't try and open these folders. Look in the upper left-hand corner of the preview area and it will say download, okay? Click on download. If you try open the folder or click on either of the two folders that are there, you will have problems, okay? And if you did that before I was able to tell you to not do it, then just close that window and go back to this page and click on it again, okay? So while that's downloading, we're going to do a little bit of a primer on Premiere Pro. So I've set that up to download. So that's that. Now, again, I'm just going to put in a little plug here. make sure you keep your files organized, okay? And there was one girl this morning in the class before this one who was having a lot of problems because she was using the memory card in her camera as a storage device for her images. And so she had hundreds of images and videos on her memory card in her camera. That should not be used as a storage device for long-term storage. Anytime you do a photo or video shoot, you should transfer the photo and or video files to your computer or to an external hard drive or to a cloud storage if you want to use OneDrive or Google Drive or Dropbox or whatever. And then reformat the memory card in your camera to get everything off of it, because the memory card in your camera is not for long-term storage, okay? And where she ran into problems was she was trying to work with images that were on that memory card, and they were having all kinds of problems with it. I won't get into the details of the problems, but suffice it to say that she was getting some really weird color things happening, some distortions of color. It almost looked like a kind of a modern painting. Her photos and her videos were not the way they're supposed to look at all, okay? And as soon as we got them off of the memory card on her camera, then everything was fine, okay? So yeah, don't do that. And make sure that your files are organized. So if you're using your computer, the hard drive on your computer, just watch that you don't fill it up, okay? I would very much recommend that you buy an external hard drive, 1 or 2 terabytes, quite inexpensive, less than $100 Canadian, and just use that for your storage of your files, okay? So the next thing we're going to do, now I'm going to run through this with you while I'm waiting for those files to download, and yours will probably download before mine does because I'm on the college's Wi-Fi here, which isn't the fastest. So we'll open Premiere Pro, then we'll get a splash page. We're going to do a new project. I'm going to take you through all of this. I'm going to take you through all of this in live. This is what the Premiere Pro interface looks like. There are 5 parts to it, okay? This part, the A part, is the preview panel for your finished video. The B section here is called the source panel. This is where you will trim videos and preview them before you put them into the final video. The C panel here is the project panel. That's where all the assets for any video project you do will be. Any video clips, any audio clips, any graphics, any still photography that you happen to use in the video, those will all be here. As well, there are tabs here that we will use, especially the effects tab. I'll show you that. Hopefully we'll get to it today. Then the D section here is the timeline. This is probably the most important part of Premiere Pro. This is where you will place assets in the order that you want them to appear in your video. And we'll also put transitions on here. We'll adjust audio. We'll do all kinds of things on the timeline. This is where a lot of the real processing and editing happens, is on the timeline. And then the last part, the E section here, is the tools. This is where all the tools are that are used in Premiere Pro. We'll only be using 2 of them for now. One is the selector tool for selecting different things on the timeline, and the other is the razor tool that we use for cutting video and audio clips, and then either deleting or moving things around, okay? So those are the sections of the Premiere Pro interface. Now on the interface is time code. I'm going to show you that. There's a couple of places right here, right there, right there, right there, right here. I guess it's in about 5 places on here where you have time code. And what the time code is it tells you where you are in the video footage time-wise. The first 2 digits of the time code are hours. The second 2 digits of the time code are minutes. The third are seconds. and the last 2 digits of the time code are frames. So if you shot at 24 frames per second, that will go up to 24, and then it will roll to the next minute. And then it will go up to 24 again and roll to the next minute. Frames at 24 frames per second is really fast. You're going to see those numbers spinning really, really quickly, okay? But it also means that you've got a lot of detail that you can edit. You can edit down to the frame. So if you're trying to coordinate 2 pieces of video, you can coordinate them to the frame. If you're trying to coordinate, let's say somebody yells and you want it to be exactly, you want their mouth to move at exactly the time the yell comes out, then you can adjust those to the frame to get it exact, okay? So that's the time code. So regarding importing the clips, there's different types of clips you can import into Premiere Pro. This is one reason why it's a really good program to use, is that it offers you a lot of flexibility. You can import AVI type, MP4 type, MOV, which is a resident Apple type, JPEGs, which are still photos, and you can import music as well, MP3s, MP4As, which are audio MP4s, lots of different ones, and they'll all work in Premiere Pro. Okay, so let me just see if if that has downloaded. Yes, it has. So I'm going to open Premiere Pro. I'd like you to do the same thing. Just open Premiere Pro. And it takes a few moments to open. You should get a splash screen that looks something like this. Okay. And we're going to click on where it says New Project in the upper left when the splash screen opens. Now here you get a number of options about what you're going to call your project, where you're going to locate it. You've also got some selection. These are new features in Premiere Pro. I have to be honest to say I haven't really experimented with these very much, so I'm not going to use these right now. We're just going to, first of all, name the project. It's untitled right now, but let's call it Premiere Pro Demo 1. Okay, Premiere Pro Demo number 1. And always make sure that you choose a location where you're going to store this. So I'm going to drop down this option and I'm going to choose a location. I'm going to choose my desktop because I'm not going to keep this. You can put these wherever you want. Make sure you put your assets and your project file in the same place though. So if they're on your hard drive, make sure they're both in the same place. Because if you move your assets after you've done your project, Premiere Pro will not be able to find them, okay? I'll explain that a little bit more in just a moment. So I'm going to put it on my desktop. So I've chosen to open it on my desktop. That's where the project file will be located. So now I'm going to do Create. And the project opens, but of course there's nothing here. I haven't imported anything. Now, that file that I had you download is a zip file. So I'm going to go into Finder. I could also just shrink the windows, but I'm just going to go into Finder and find where that file is and double click on it to unzip it. Okay, so now I've got this file, this folder open so I can use it. So that was just in Finder, so I'm going to X that out. Now, here's all your sections, and remember, whichever panel has got the blue square around it is the panel in Premiere Pro that is active. So starting in the upper left is the source panel. That's where we'll preview and trim clips. On the upper right is where you will view clips that are on the timeline, which is in the lower right. Then to the immediate left of that is your tools panel. Then to the left of that is your project panel, or sometimes I call it the assets panel because that's where all of your assets will be. So I'm going to double click on where it says import media to start, and double click on that, and then navigate to where the files are that you just downloaded in the folder that you unzipped. Select all of those files. One says Autumn Leaves, one says Big Rig, and one says No Chaser, which stands for Straight No Chaser. And these are just video clips, short video clips of a band that I was involved with a number of years ago. And just going to click on import. So I've selected them and import them. And now you can see that they have appeared here. Yours may look something like this. They may look like icons, okay? You can either choose to display them as icons, where you can see a little, almost like, it looks like a still of the clip, or you can do it by list. I find that if I'm, with some video projects in the past, I've found that I have so many files that in the icon view, if it's like this, if I've got 20, 30 files, I end up scrolling so much that it's just a pain. So in that case, the list view is better. You don't get a preview of what it was, but as long as your files have been named properly, then you shouldn't have any problem locating things. Now, there's another thing you can do to help organize your files in this panel as well, in the Assets panel, and that is you can create folders here. Now, you'll notice that if you go down to the lower right in this particular panel and hover over the folder, it says New Bin, and the little instructions you get at the bottom says Create a New Bin. This is a holdover from the days of film, okay? Because back in the days of film, or even if film is still used today on a movie set, they store the film in bins, literally in metal bins.
Bruce?
Yes. Hi.
Hi. Can you please record this? This is like really difficult for me to understand. It's getting like I'm getting really confused in all of this.
Okay. Yeah, I'll record it. We're not supposed to, but I will.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. We're recording. You're live. Okay. So just to go back, I'll do a quick recap just for, I'm not sure who requested I record this, but just a quick recap. So we opened.
Bruce.
Yeah. Oh, hi.
Hi. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So just a very quick recap. So we opened Premiere Pro. We downloaded the files, and then once Premiere Pro was open, we created a new project. We gave it the name PP Demo, Premiere Pro Demo number 1. Then Premiere Pro opened to this. Now, one thing that I didn't mention is the workspace. Mine is defaulted to the edit workspace because that's where I do my editing. Yours probably defaulted to a different workspace. So I'm going to suggest you go up under Window at the very top of the interface and go to the first option below that, which is Workspaces, and then go to Editing. Okay. Yours probably defaulted to Essentials, or it might have defaulted to All Panels. But if you go to Editing, this will give you just the right number of windows to be able to do basic editing, okay? So again, Window, Workspaces, Editing, and this should give you this. Then I imported, again, I'm just recapping what I just did, imported to the project panel down here, double click on it, go navigate to wherever you've got your files that you're going to use for the project. I've got mine on my desktop, so I just navigate to Assets for Premiere Pro Tutorial. I selected all of those, and then I clicked on Import. Now, I've already done it, so I'm not going to do it again. And then they show up here. Again, just another quick recap. You can display your assets here either as a list view or as icons. If you do icons, you'll get a little preview of whatever it is there. And in the case of video files, it will just show you the first frame of the video. Okay. Now, and I mentioned that you could end up with a lot of files that you use, a lot of assets, and in which case putting them in folders can be very helpful. So if I just click on create new bin, you'll see that it creates a folder or a bin. I'm going to call this one video clips. Okay. And name it video clips. And then I'm just going to click on an empty space. I'm going to drag each one of these, just drag and drop it into that folder. So now I've got a folder that's video clips. I open it, there's my video clips. Now, I don't have any other clips here. I've only got those 3, but let's say I had some audio clips with music that I was going to use as background music. Then I could make a bin and I would call it audio. And then I would put all of my audio clips into that bin or that folder. Okay. And let's say I had some graphics. I had some titles that I had imported either from After Effects or somewhere else. So I would make another bin and I would call it graphics. Graphics. So now I've got 3 folders, okay? And let's say I also had some still photos that I was going to use in the editing. So I would create another one and I would call it still photos. Okay. So then I put all of my assets in folders and that, because to be honest with you, I've had video projects where I've had 20, 30, 40 files that I'm working with or more. And if I don't put them in these folders, trying to find something on a list of 30 or 40 things can be really a pain. Okay, so this is a very good way to organize your files. So we only have things right now in the video clips file, and I'm just going to view these up here. I'm going to select the first one, which is on leaves, and drag it up and just drag it and drop it on the source panel right above. And you'll see that it appears there. Now, if I play it, I can hear, you probably won't be able to hear it, but I can hear this. I should be able to. Yeah. I can hear it playing and I can see it's playing. And if I look at the time code here, I can see it's moving along. So what do I do with this? Well, you'll notice at the beginning of it, there's several seconds of nobody doing anything, of it not playing. So let's say I wanted to edit that out. I would just place the time head, and here's the time head right here. It looks like a little upside down house, okay? That's the time, it's called the location indicator. I just call it the time head or the playback head. And I'm gonna put it at about the 8-second mark. And I don't want that first part to be in there. So I'm gonna mark that as the in point where I start. So the video will start here. So if I click on this little bracket key here, or I can use the keyboard shortcut, the letter I for in, that's where it will start. So if I hit the letter I, where the playback head is, that's where it will start. And let's say I only want 10 seconds of this video. So I'm going to drag the playhead back along to the 18-second mark. And then I'm going to hit the other bracket key here, or the keyboard shortcut, the letter O for out. Now, the only bits of this that will be used are the bits between the brackets. Okay. Then I'm going to grab the preview here, literally grab the video, drag it and drop it down to the timeline. So I just dragged it and dropped it down to the timeline. Now I've got that audio and video. The video will automatically go to V1 for the first one that I bring down here. The audio will automatically go to A1. Remember, when you record video footage with your camera, or your phone for that matter, you're actually recording 2 different tracks, the video track and the audio track, and they're separate. And when you drag it down here onto the timeline, it does in fact graphically or visually show them as being separate. The video track will go on the V channels or tracks, okay? V1 in this case. The audio will go on to A1 for the audio. Okay? And let's go to the next clip on the in our video clips. It says Big Rig Edited MP4. Grab that from the project panel, drag it up to the source panel, and again, we can edit this. So let's say I'm going to only want from the 10-second mark on this. Oh, and to do individual frames when it comes to your editing, use the backwards and forward arrows on your keyboard. That will move the playback head by frame. So you can be really, really precise. If I want this to start exactly on the 10-second mark, I'm going to move the playback head by frame to get it exactly to 10 seconds. Then I'm going to hit the keyboard shortcut, the letter I. That will mark my in point. Again, I'm going to use 10 seconds of this only. So I drag the playback head to the 20-second mark. I can get it exactly on 20 seconds by using the forward or backward arrows keys and hit the keyboard shortcut, the letter O. That marks my out point. Okay. Now I'm going to drag that. And remember, you grab the preview. I'm going to drag it down to the timeline and put it after the first one I did. So now I've got Autumn Leaves and Big Rig, but I'm starting to run out of space here. So in order to change the spacing or the scale here, down near the bottom of this timeline, you'll see that there's two little grab handles. By grabbing the grab handle, I can either compress or expand how this appears. So I'm going to compress it, drag it to the right to compress it. And that gives me more space. So now I'm going to go to the last video that I imported, Straight No Chaser edited.mp4, drag it up to the source panel. And same thing, I'm going to do just arbitrarily 10 seconds in, get it exact, hit keyboard shortcut I, that's my in point, go to 20 seconds, get it exact. Hit O for out, drag it down and put it after these three clips. Okay, two clips, sorry. So now I've got the three clips on the timeline, one after another. If I play it back, it's only 30 seconds long. Actually, it's a little less than that because the first one I didn't do a full 10 seconds on. And I can view it up here. I can see it playing back. Goes to the next one. And then it goes to the third one. Okay, and that's that. Now you'll notice that over on the right-hand side of the interface, you could see some green and yellow bars moving up and down. Those are your audio levels. That's called a VU meter. VU stands for volume units. And that is literally the units of volume, of loudness and softness. We're going to talk about audio in another class, and I'll have a whole tutorial on audio for you. This is just kind of the basics of Premiere Pro. So there's how you can lay out your video clips. Now, the thing is that there's a number of different ways that we can work with these now that they're on the timeline. But one thing we can do, let's say we wanted to cut, let's say the person who hired us to do this didn't want 30 seconds for promo. Let's say it's a promo for this band, and they only want 15 seconds. So I could either go back and re-edit on the source panel, or I can actually edit right on the timeline. And to do that, to cut these, I would go over and choose the razor tool on the toolbar here. Looks like a little razor blade, or you can use the keyboard shortcut, the letter C. Then when I come over, you'll see that when I go onto the timeline, you can see the razor blade there. Wherever I position that, if I click on that, it will put a cut at that point. So I'm going to go about halfway through the first clip and cut it. Then I'm going to go about halfway through the second clip and cut it. And then about halfway through the third clip and cut it. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my selector tool. It's the keyboard shortcut's the letter V, or you can just click on it. It's the top tool on the toolbar here. And I'm going to choose this one here, the second half of the first clip, and hit the delete key. Gone. I'm going to go to the second one for Big Rig, select it, just click once on it, hit delete, gone. And I'm going to go to the last one, select it, click on it, and hit delete, and it's gone. So now I have a couple of choices on how I can fill in these holes here, because these holes will, as it's playing, will just be silent and it'll be just a black screen. Okay. So how do I fill those in? A couple of ways I can do that. One is to click on that space in between and then right click on it. And you'll get a command that says ripple delete. Click on ripple delete and it will automatically move everything over from the left, or sorry, from the right to the left. Or the other thing that I can do is I can just select the video and audio tracks and then just drag them over. And you'll notice that there's a snap function. So when I get close, it will all of a sudden jump and connect. You can turn that off if you want. It's up here. You'll see it looks like a little magnet in the upper left of the timeline here. And if you want to turn that feature off, you can turn that off, but I would generally leave it on if I was you, because it makes it easier to get everything to line up. So now I've got something near a 15 seconds, actually 16 seconds. So if I wanted to literally make it 15 seconds, I would have to trim a little bit more off of one of these. I could do it off of this one here. And if I get the razor tool, I could just trim off a little bit more and then delete it if I wanted to. You can also use, what's that other tool that we can use? The ripple edit tool, or we can just go to the end of it with the selector, and you'll see how if I go near the end of the clip, it will turn into a little arrow. I can just drag it in just a little bit and just shorten it just enough to, I just want to do it 1 second. That should be enough right there. Oh, 10 more, 10 frames. I got to go in 10 frames. There we go. So now I've got it to 15 seconds and 1 frame. I'm just looking at the timeline, the time code up here. Or I could look at it down here as well if I wanted to drag that to the end. Okay, but there's the time code, 15 seconds and 1 frame. I'm not going to worry about that 1 frame. So now we've edited it down to 15 seconds. Okay, so that's a pretty harsh look though, because it's jumping from one clip to another with no transitions. Keep in mind that there are 2 types of editing that we do in the very broad sense. One type of editing is called continuity editing. And I should show you this one. Start 1 second here. So we'll take a quick look at this slide before we get into this any further. So as I said, editing is done in a number of ways, but the broad categories are continuity, where time is progressing as if it was real time. So the action in the video clips is moving along as if it was real time moving along. The other style of editing is what we call montage. And that's where time and space are jumping around. You're moving from one scene to a completely different scene at a completely different time. That's montage editing. If time and space are moving continuously, it's called continuity editing. Okay? And if we go from one clip to another without any transition whatsoever, that's called a hard cut. That's what these are right now. It's going from one clip to the other as a hard cut. Okay? That's probably the most common edit type that is used. In this case, it's not a very good one because it's bang, bang, bang. It's not working very well. Anytime we have a change of time and or space, we usually will use some kind of a transition so that it's not so kind of abrupt. In order to use transitions, we're going to go over to the project panel where we had all our assets, but we're going to go to the tab that says Effects. And if you can't see, depending on the size of your display, you might not be able to see all of the tabs here. But if you go to these two little arrows, you'll be able to see all of the tabs, and you want to go to the one that says Effects. Here's where you get a whole bunch of things, and these are super easy to use because they are just drag and drop. So we're going to go to the video transitions. The most commonly used video transition for changing from one time to another or one location or space to another is the dissolve. And the most common of the dissolves is the cross dissolve. So just open those folders, the video transitions folder, open to dissolve, open the dissolve folder, and then you'll see cross dissolve has a little blue outline around the square. Okay? Grab that, drag it over to the timeline, and drop it in between the first video clip and the second one. Okay. Now when we do the playback, watch how instead of it being a hard cut, it will be a dissolve. Much less jarring than this one, which is, bang, hard cut, okay? The hard cuts are jarring. Where do you use a hard cut? Well, let's say you've got dialogue between two people and the camera's going back and forth from one to the other, okay? This is what we call over and back or shot, reverse shot. Very common type of shooting, but you see it all the time in movies. Those are often done as hard cuts, okay? Because they're continuous in time, it's just a change of camera angle. So very, very commonly done. But when we're shifting from one time period or one location to another, then we usually use some kind of a transition, and the cross dissolve is the most commonly used one. So I'm going to drag the cross dissolve over for the next one as well. Now, there let me try that again. There are also audio transitions because we don't want the audio to jar either. So if you go to audio transitions folder in the same assets there, and there's far fewer audio transitions than there is video. And there's just crossfade, and then the most commonly used one is the constant power. So grab it, drag it, and drop it, but this time drop it onto the audio between the two clips, the audio track. Same thing for the next one. And you can also do this at the beginning to have a fade in, and we can drag it over to the very end of the last clip to fade out. So now we've got our audio and our video. And as far as that goes, let's go back to the video transitions folder and let's put the dissolve at the very beginning of the first video and at the very end of the last video. Now watch what the video looks like. That looks much more professional, much easier to view, smoother, better. Okay, so that's all we're going to do on the editing for today. But the last thing I want to show you only takes a few moments, and that is exporting your video. Because remember, the Premiere Pro project file is all Premiere Pro does when you set this up and you import these clips. It doesn't actually move the clips into the project file. All it does is provide a link for Premiere Pro to access these wherever they happen to be on your computer. Okay. And the Premiere Pro project file, nobody would be able to view it unless they had Premiere Pro on their computer and all of the assets. Okay. In order to export it so that somebody could view it on their phone or on their own computer, if it's come from somebody else, or to upload it to the internet, you have to export it as an MP4. Okay. So to do that, the first thing we're going to do though is we're going to save our project. So just go to save. We've already named it, or you could do save as if you wanted to rename it and call it something different. But I'm just going to hit save under file, or you can use the keyboard shortcut Command S, that will save it. But now we have to export it. So to do that, we're going to go up under file, down to export near the bottom, and then media. Click on media. Oops. Sorry. Before we do that, I have to choose the timeline or the program window. That was my fault. Sorry, a little slip there. So I'm just going to choose the timeline. Then I'm going to go to export media. Now I will get the dialog. What will come up? And this is your export dialog here. So we can rename it if we want under file name. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it band demo. And the format, now remember I mentioned about the H.264 format. This is where you must be sure to set it to H.264. There's a number of different formats that you can use. Yours will probably default to something different, but you want it to be on H.264. Bottom line, this is the most compatible, works the best. The presets, you'll have a whole bunch of different ones that you can choose from, lots of them. You'll only get a small preview of the different presets here. If you want to see all of them, click on where it says more presets at the bottom of the drop-down window. And here you get a ton of different presets, all kinds of different ones. The most commonly used one, and the one that we'll be using for this course, is the YouTube 1080 Full HD. So scroll until you get to YouTube 1080p Full HD. This will automatically set all of your parameters for frame size, frame rate, bit depth, everything will be set automatically. I'm going to select that one and then hit OK. That automatically set all of the parameters for the video, the source, and the output for that. That is a very, very usable preset. You can view that on just about anything. So then after that, all you do is export. Oh, and you can also change your location if you want. You see where it says location? Let's say I wanted to export this to a folder or something. I could just click on that. And if I wanted to make a folder, I could call this finished video. And I could click create and save that. We'll put it in a new location. That location can be anywhere you want. And then it exports it and we're done. So then I can click on, I'm going to quit Premiere Pro. And then I'm just going to go and use Finder and just look for it on my desktop. There's my finished video. There it is there. I'm going to see if it works. So I'm going to double click on it. It should open QuickTime because I'm using a Mac. Should anyway. There we go. So there's my open QuickTime. And there's my video with a nice fade in. Dissolve, both audio and video. Another dissolve, audio and video. And then the fade out at the end. So it worked. Okay. So there is your basic editing in Premiere Pro. Now, I did in fact record that. So if anybody's having any trouble with that, please refer back to the the recording that'll be posted. But that's brought us to the end of our time. Does anybody have any quick questions? Nope.
I have a question about Premiere Pro.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, but actually I have tried to use it before and I get some trouble with it when I want to, the footage color is changed. Can it show my screen or something like that?
Sure, what is it that you want to see? Like right from the beginning?
Like when I put a footage from, I airdrop it from my phone and I download it in and I import it. Then I want to put it in the main frame to working and it changed the color of the footage.
It changed the color of your footage?
Yes, but only happened with footage from my iPhone.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't know why that happened. The only thing I can think of is, okay, I'm going to do the whole tutorial one more time, but I'm going to do it quite quickly. But this will be recorded so that you can do it on your own if you want. Okay, and you can stop the recording whenever you want. But I'm going to do that whole tutorial one more time. So,
yes.
Open Premiere Pro. New project. Give it a name. Call it Demo 2. Make sure you've chosen the location for it. I'm going to put it on my desktop again, just to make it easy. You can put it wherever you want. Create. Now, make sure that you've set your workspace to, so Window, Workspaces, Editing. Then yours will look like this. Double click where it says Import Media to start. Double click on that. Navigate to where your files are, your clips, your video clips. Choose the ones that you want to import. Click on Import. We'll import them. I won't go into making the bins for audio and whatnot. I won't go into that. Then drag one of them up to the source panel. Preview what you want. I'm just going to randomly say I want 5 seconds of this from the 22nd point to, and then I hit the keyboard shortcut, the letter I to mark it in, and then I want it to go to the 25-second point. And I hit the keyboard shortcut O to mark it out. Then I grab the preview of it up here, drag it down to the timeline and drop it. Then it goes there. I'm going to do the same thing on the next clip. Drag it up to the source panel, then trim it to what I want. Again, I'm going to do this time from 15 in to 20, just 5 seconds of it. I'm doing this very quickly and very sloppily, I might add. If I was doing this for real, I would do it much more carefully. Drag it down on the timeline.
It happened right here.
So, but my question is, did you do everything that I just did in the order that I did? Because if you're on a different, say, let's say, for example, if you're on the color workspace, you could get something completely different like that. Okay. If you did everything that I just did, then the only thing that I can think of is, for some reason, your footage is corrupt in some way or is faulty or something. You can see what I did just now. Now, the thing is that I didn't shoot this footage with an iPhone. This was shot with a camera, with a DSLR.
Yes,
So,
it should happen with the footage from phone.
It shouldn't happen with footage from your phone, though. You should be able to import footage from your phone, and it should. So my suggestion is do what I just did, okay? Every step very, very carefully. Don't do anything differently. And it should be fine. There's no reason why it shouldn't be. The only reason why I can think of that it would be different is if you're doing something different.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
Okay. You try that on your own. Do you have a camera, by the way?
Yes.
Then use your camera. Don't use your phone.
Because I have another footage. I want to add it in.
Yeah. It may be because of your phone, but try the steps that I did in the order that I did them very carefully. Don't do anything different. Nothing different at all. Okay. And hopefully that will work. Okay. Anyway, we have to stop now. So to
Yes,
be
thank you.
continued, no problem. To be continued next week. Okay. And like I said, this is recorded so you can refer to that. Okay. Have a good week, everybody. We'll see you next week. Oh, don't forget, by the way, one thing. Don't forget about the discussion board. There'll be a new posting on the discussion board for this week. That's really kind of the only quote unquote homework that you have for this week. Okay. Have a good week, everybody. Bye just now.
Bye, Bruce. Thank you.